Welcome to this week's very special episode of Hired. If you don't know already, I am your host, Mike Thompson from Spark. And each week we bring you an episode where we talk about something to do in the labor market, the hiring process, or just a trend that's going on. And today I'm so excited to talk everything content. And it seems to be the new buzzword. I like to say content's the new data because everybody's talking about how important it is for organizations to invent in content and really the ability to tell stories. And my guest today, Victoria, is the lens and her background and experience in the content creation space stems from, back in, editor days all the way through. And she just has such a great sense of why content is so important and how to actually build an effective content creation team and where it should sit in the organization to be the most effective as well. These are a lot of topics that I'm going to be jumping into with Victoria today. And, I figure stop talking. Nobody's here to see me. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to my very special guest, Victoria Hoff. Victoria.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us today.
I'm so happy to be here. I love this topic, so I could talk endlessly about it.
Well, it's funny. And before we get into it, when I initially reached out to you, I was like, hey, Victoria, I have this idea for this show. I want to talk about these things. And you wrote back and you're like, this is my passion. I can talk about this all the time. Are you sure you want to bring me on to chat about this? So, and during our conversations, I've learned so much as us being a small business and investing in content creation is something and kind of going through it, but seeing the rise of this in organizations and the importance being placed on it, but maybe not necessarily given the proper investment or the proper, I don't want to say location in the organization, but things we can jump into. But before we get into the topic today, where are you dialing in from?
I'm in Los Angeles. I would say it's sunny Los Angeles, but it's kind of dreary today. But I'm kind of welcoming the cloudiness after a crazy heat wave over the past few weeks. So I'm enjoying the fall weather, as we call it here, when it dips below 70.
And what does a morning look like? A typical morning in sunny California for you? Is it a coffee and a walk? Is it people like to think that everybody in California surfs, but like I don't want to jump that.
But what is surfing in a minute? But yeah, you hit the nail on the head. For me, it's coffee and walking my dog so that they'll kind of calm down for the rest of the day. So that's kind of how I kick things off this morning.
That's amazing. That's great. And it's such a great way to start the week or the day anyway. So I want to jump into this because there's a lot of stuff that I want to go over. And I think the best way to set the table for the conversation is what you think an effective content team is responsible for in an organization, and kind of we can start the conversation there and then we can kind of branch off. But in your opinion and through your background and experience, what you think they're ultimately responsible for and how they can be effective. And I'm going to give you the big screen to jump in here.
Perfect. I mean, it's a very loaded question, and it's one of the reasons why I can talk for so long about this, because I think that definition is changing all the time, especially because content touches everything these days. It shows up everywhere. It's really, it's hard to define because the way I see it, it's wherever, like any touch point where we're talking to our audience. So whether that's social, whether that's, through a blog, but also, even copy on the site. So it really is kind of touching everything, and it evolves all the time. But in my experience, I think at minimum for me, I like to ensure that our bases are covered from both a creative aspect and an analytical aspect. And that's something I think I'm going to probably come back to a lot during this conversation, that balance of creative and analytical, because I think it's really, really key. And my ideal content team is defining our approach to storytelling at a high level, so often in partnership with a brand team or a brand lead, but we're also responsible for execution and management at a channel level. So usually our own channels include a blog or editorial site and social media. We'll usually work very cross-functionally with everyone from digital to e-com to paid acquisition teams to ensure that, our storytelling and brand voice is really consistent across the board. I don't like for those teams to work in a silo. And I also really like to have a strategic arm on my content team. So someone responsible for SEO, audience insights, so that we're truly taking this data-driven full funnel approach. So that's kind of, a brief synopsis of how I like to start that approach. But again, I think that definition is changing all the time. Even in the past 2 years, seeing things like the rise of TikTok and how that's completely changing how we approach content. I've kind of come up my career. It's been really interesting because, as you mentioned, I started an editorial, as an editor for these really iconic, traditionally print publications like Elle Magazine. And I was part of it. My very first job out of college was being part of their first digital team. And it's kind of crazy that only 10 years ago or 12 years ago, that was their very first digital team. And it's been really interesting for my career, I think, to kind of, follow this trajectory of the media landscape where first, the key distribution channel was Twitter or Facebook, and then it became Instagram. And now it's, a little bit of everything, and it's changing all the time. So yeah, it's just been a really, really interesting ride. And I think that agility is really, really key here.
I like what you said about creative, analytical, and the landscape changing, but ultimately it's storytelling, right? And I'd be curious to know, when you made the first leap from print to digital, the framework is still the same. You're still telling a story. It's just the way it's distributed is different, and the audience it probably reaches. Are you seeing further fragmentation now with all these social media channels and all of that? But at the core, is the framework still the same in terms of trying to tell a compelling story to an audience, and you're trying to figure out which channel is the best to utilize? Does it complicate the framework, or is it still fundamentally the same sort of practice?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think fundamentally it just comes back to really, really fantastic storytelling. And it's why I always say, like, editors make the best content marketers, or former editors do, because, that's how we started our work in our careers, was really creating really great content and meeting this organic audience where they are, and, leveraging content to build community. So I think it all comes back to, like, telling really wonderful stories, finding out what your brand's story is. And I think it is interesting, the time that we're in, where I call it the TikTok era, where everyone's kind of, on TikTok, creators talk about niching down, or, basically differentiating in that way. And it's kind of this marriage of niching down, but also like more lo-fi content. So I think the execution is looking a little bit different these days. And, that polished look on Instagram, for example. Obviously, Instagram is a very challenging environment these days. And I think that we're kind of treating that as more of a second website or a second storefront rather than an actual social channel. But I think the great thing about this TikTok era is that aspect of niching down. I think it's really encouraging brands to find, so many brands want to be everything to everyone. And it's really, I think that just ultimately doesn't really serve the brand. And it's finding, what differentiates your story, what, how can you kind of turn the lens on even like your internal team and put them at the forefront of your storytelling, because I think a lot of audience members are really connecting with that. So I think like the execution is going to continue to evolve, but at the end of the day, it's basically figuring out how to tell a really great story, as you said.
And when we talk about that in terms of the content team, and we can talk about the individual makeup, and you mentioned kind of individuals come from editing background, usually make, because of their background, great storytellers as part of a content team. To be effective, where do you think the content team should sit in an organization? And I think we both believe in the same, where anytime you have to tell a story to any audience representing an organization, content's involved. So marketing, we talk about, like, you're telling a story to customers, but there's also talent is telling a story to candidates, and there's a bunch of other, and then there's internal communication. So in your opinion, where do you think content would be best served being in an organization?
It's an endless debate. I think, I've had this debate at every single organization I've worked for and worked in. And again, it's something I think is changing all the time. In my opinion, I would say like the most effective place to be is, first of all, just to kind of zoom out and really treat the content team as this very cross-functional conduit, like you kind of mentioned. I think, I like to input into, all of our different, obviously, external channels, but also things like corporate comms. I think that there should be a lot of synchronicity there. But, I've sat on a brand team. I've just sat on a broader marketing team. I typically like to sit within the marketing org because, whether it's internal or external comms, we are, telling the story is just marketing at its core. But I like to treat it very, very cross-functionally. I prefer for social to sit within content. I've been in orgs where it sits a little bit separately, but we know it's a deep partnership. So I think, there's a debate for both, especially when you want to debate organic versus paid. But I typically like to sit as my own specific team. I like for us to be kind of driving in partnership with brand what that high level storytelling is and what that calendar looks like. And then, it's up to us to kind of input into what that looks like across all these different channels, whether it's my team's own specific channels like blog or social, to things like, recruiting, or those paid channels. But it should really just at its very core, just be a deep partnership, no matter what that looks like. I just prefer for like the high arching strategy to kind of come from this singular place, of course, in partnership with other marketing leads.
And I guess you see an emphasis, content being closely tied to the marketing organization because of the ties to the storytelling aspect to customers. Do you feel there's an opportunity, and you kind of touched on it already, like obviously I have a flair to and a bias towards hiring and talent acquisition, but I have a challenge about why content teams aren't leveraged more for the sake of storytelling to that underserved market. Have you seen, or do you think that there's an opportunity that it could be leveraged more for storytelling, or have you seen it leveraged well in environments where talent is actually leveraging content creation to tell good stories, or do you see a gap there?
I think that people are kind of I think in general, it kind of speaks to this kind of just the through line of everything we've been talking about, where I think people are just starting to kind of understand that it should really be this centralized thing, and that no matter what you're talking about internally or externally, it should all kind of be consistent. And I think the talent acquisition aspect is really interesting because I think traditionally the people teams in HR and recruiting sits very separately. And I've been in orgs where, they do their work and I'm over here because I'm just focused more on, external comms. But in my last role, I actually worked very, very closely with the talent acquisition team, and we found that to be really effective. We built a really fantastic community on LinkedIn. It was actually our largest social community, which was really amazing. And just to be able to kind of, again, it speaks to what I was just, talking about with TikTok. And I'm sure everyone's seen this trend on TikTok where, brands are doing these amazing, hilarious videos of showing their internal talent. And that then in turn attracts other talent because they want to be part of that culture. And so we did a lot of employee features and days in the life and really great videos and really great storytelling about what it was like to work at that company. And I think it was really, really effective in that way. And it was also just really interesting for me, to kind of learn about all these different aspects of the org that I really knew nothing about. So yeah, I think it should all be a partnership. And I think also then when that kind of feeds into other cultural aspects like employee programming and the storytelling involved there, I've also had a lot of great experiences kind of guiding that messaging too, because I always say, your external messaging is only as good as your internal culture. And I never want to be in a position where, we're talking about something that we believe in as a brand externally, and if that's not reflected in our internal culture and our internal programming and values. So I always like to start inward and then kind of reflect that outward.
And do you find, based on, the consumer and the candidate and the sophisticated nature of how they're doing, they're sniffing that out more, and that's why these TikTok channels and everything, where they're showing more authentic and real versions of whether it's the brand or the employer brand, they're getting smarter at calling BS almost about like what it actually is, and it kind of shines the light on organizations that are doing it well and reflecting those things, but also it's a cause for concern for maybe some that aren't. So do you find the channel is forcing that to happen more, or is it more the actual consumers changing their behaviors that's causing that, or maybe a combination of both?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. And I think it's also just, starting to kind of treat channels like TikTok or even Instagram, but mostly TikTok as like a second, but even more like effective version of LinkedIn. I think we all know that like there's the trope around LinkedIn where these posts tend to be very stilted, and everyone has this like very like well thought out story that they tell in a post. And I've seen a lot of satire around that. But TikTok, it's funnier. It really, I think, gives a better look at what's actually happening and the kind of fun that people are having behind the scenes. And that's actually, I think, especially in the environment that we're in, where it's very remote first, and or hybrid, and people really want a compelling reason to kind of come back to the office. Like, I think we're going to kind of see that become more and more of an emphasis, because people want to know that if they have to go back, they're going to have a really, really good time while doing it. And I think also just from a consumer standpoint, even like customers and consumers want to know that they're buying into a brand that like isn't just so self-serious all the time. Of course, it depends on the industry and the type of brand, but they want to know that they're buying into this culture, and that there are good people behind what they're buying or what they're using. So I think that's also really effective in kind of displaying that as well.
You heard it here first. The rise of TikTok for recruiting is going to become recruiting content it's on the rise, and I think it's going to continue to. It's an underused platform for that storytelling aspect, and you do see that. I mean, LinkedIn is almost like Instagram, right? Where it's like it is polished to some degree, and it shows a certain side of work professionally, and like Instagram shows a polished version of that. And now you're seeing these other platforms pop up where they want to see the authentic, genuine version of what it actually is, and that's more real for us, and that's what we want to consume, instead of just seeing these polished versions of everything all the time. So I like that, the rise of TikTok. Now, we talked a little bit about content teams holistically in terms of where they should sit. When you're actually building out a content team for those individuals that are in leadership, there's a challenge now for hiring across the board, and I would say it's even in content. Where would you even start, or how would you look at like finding skills or assessing skills in building up your content team?
Oh man, where do I even begin? I mean, I think I'm gonna be a broken record, but I think again, it's just really making sure your bases are covered in terms of like that technical strategy, but also obviously a lot of creativity. And I think there is kind of a bit more of an understanding these days around hiring for that. And I think that kind of starts with bringing in someone who has that high level vision and kind of drive that content strategy at the helm, because I think that being in my position, I know, for example, that a great social person isn't necessarily someone who like has this massive portfolio and has made like a million things go viral. I think that a lot of recruiters who haven't led content teams often fall in that trap. They look for that unicorn who has all this, crazy experience managing all of these social channels. And they want to know that, you made something go viral. In reality, some of the most talented social people I've worked with are very, very young. They're very, very green, but they are, one, very hungry, and two, they're on these platforms all the time. So they know what's actually performing. They know what's actually working. And it is my favorite position to be in as a manager, when someone who's younger on my team is adamant that this sounds crazy, but it's trending right now, and I just know it's going to work. Like, let's give it a try. And I just kind of say, take the wheel, go for it, and then it performs. And I think that's a testament to a good manager knows that they don't know everything, but also that just kind of trickles down to hiring practices and understanding that what we look for in a good content person is it's bigger than portfolio. There's a lot of hunger there, and there's an eagerness to learn. And I think that's true even for other aspects too. One of my very best hires ever, who was kind of a content marketing manager under me at Ritual, which is a great D2C company that I worked for. She was just a fantastic writer. And the reason why I hired her is because her edit test showed that she just really understood the brand voice, which is a very difficult thing to train, but she had just done her research. She just got it, and she understood. And she actually beat out someone who is a little bit more experienced in the realm of things like SEO and content strategy. And she kind of came in and was like, but I also want to really learn those more technical things. And so we sat down for, I think, like a couple of weeks and just went through it all and learned it. And she just became such an invaluable member of the org, even more so than she already was. So I think it's understanding that, looking for specific talents or a quality like hunger or eagerness to learn, And obviously you want that baseline of skills, but looking beyond that to kind of understand like what can you train versus like what is that X factor that you want to bring in. So I think, I ideally like to kind of come in and build teams, not necessarily from scratch. I usually inherit a few people, really great people, but I like to kind of have the reins in terms of looking for that talent because I kind of know what works and exactly what I just said, like what that kind of X factor to look for.
And it seems like there's a trend across the board in all domains of hiring where there's less emphasis on experience and more on skills. And I don't like the term soft skills. I like kind of skills and characteristics that fit with the team, right? Because not every individual has to be hungry necessarily to be successful, but in some domains, in some fields like this one we're talking about, that's a very, very important aspect to it. And the ability to learn and have that passion because it's constantly changing. Right. Mm-hmm. So those things, and experience is less valuable because it hasn't been around that long. So you're not going to get someone that's been doing this for, in the same way for this amount of time. It's going to be a constant change. So showing that is critical. How do you actually assess for that though? Like that's such a hard thing. Like if you're looking, because even before that, and I'll start it. Like if you're looking at resumes, are there certain things that you look at to make assumptions or generalizations, say like, I'd be interested to learn more about these things in an interview? Like, what's your process that jumps out?
Yeah, I think it's definitely like a case by case basis. I think that a couple things that I might look for, and I know I'm going to kind of contradict what I said and say that, because I was just saying like portfolio isn't anything. I do like to see like some like writing samples for copywriters. Obviously that's really important. Or like just even if like you have no experience as a social person, if you are like specific, I mean like corporate experience, like you can still put together a portfolio or kind of come up with these nuggets of ideas and kind of illustrate that on a online portfolio or Canva or something. But so I think I look for that. I look for things like how quickly was this person promoted at their last job? So the person that I was talking about earlier, that was another like green flag that we saw for her. She was promoted within like 3 months of joining her last position. And, when I spoke to her references, it was, she was just hit the ground running and, just immediately wanted to do everything and just went above and beyond. And like, that's that quality that we look for. And like you mentioned, especially for content where it's changing all the time. And I like to set healthy boundaries, but content, things come up on a dime and you have to like kind of be all hands on deck. So like, that's a really important quality. But one thing I also always do, and kind of once we're past the resume stage and having like really great conversations, obviously edit tests, I always recommend everyone do that. I know there's kind of a debate around like making anyone do too much work during the hiring process. And I can certainly understand that. So I kind of try to keep it really, really brief, but just to kind of, measure someone's understanding of our brand voice, but also just how they think about things and how they kind of creatively approach an idea or a KPI that we're trying to deliver on, and like what they're kind of ideating around that. So I think there's just like a series of different things. And yeah, it can be tricky. And sometimes the process takes several weeks or even months to find that person. But I just think, just all said, just some of my favorite hires have been truly out of the box hires, and they haven't been the people with, those brand name resumes. I think I've worked with some really incredible people who do have those brand name resumes, but I see too often that, recruiters pass over really, really great and talented people just because they don't tick a certain, Fortune 500 or big tech box. And I want us to kind of step away from that and kind of look at the full picture, especially for, content hires who tend to be a little bit younger and have less of that, quote unquote, traditional experience.
And I like the portfolio is like the equalizer, right? Anybody can have one. Anybody can create, exactly. Especially if you're early on in your career, everybody has the ability now, especially younger generations coming up, to create some really cool content and showcase it. So like, you don't have to work at a place to have that experience. You could just showcase. So I love that you look at that and give people what they're passionate about, and the work that they showcase is meaningful to them. So you get to see that, and you almost see them through their work. And I find like so powerful to be able to see that. So it's unique in content that you get that, where other industries, it's not as clear to necessarily see people through their work like you can in this space. So that's really cool. And I know we're running close on time. I feel like we could be talking for hours, but the future of content based on what you've seen kind of coming up, going from print to digital into the social media realm, into this TikTok era. What does the future of content look like in your opinion? And that may be, I know that's probably a whole episode in itself. So I'm setting you up here for not a concise answer, but I'm curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, it's so hard to say. And you sent me this topic ahead of time and I'm still kind of brainstorming on it because it's so difficult to say. Like, we couldn't have seen the rise of TikTok coming. I mean, remember 2 years ago when we thought like Clubhouse was everything? It changes all the time. So I think it's really just setting your team up for success to be agile for this constantly changing landscape. One thing I will say, like even just from an org and team perspective, is recruiters and team leads and ELTs kind of wisening up to just the importance of content and the importance of investing in it. I think that there's this a little bit of a delta between, understanding that, we want to invest in content, but then, saying, but it's all organic, so we shouldn't be putting any budget behind it. It still needs some budget. It's really important. And I think also just part of that budget is just providing the appropriate headcount, because I can't tell you how many positions I've been in where we have one social manager who is managing, ideation, creation, execution, and reporting and analytics, and that is like 4 different jobs in one. You need at least 2 people on an effective social team, in my opinion, if not more. And I think we are starting to see that change quite a bit. Social teams are their own teams in the org, so I think that's really key. I think the through line, regardless of what's happening, and what those channels are, is I think search is so important. That's something I could talk about for, like 3 episodes. I'm so passionate about SEO. And I think we're kind of, entering this era where it's beyond, Google and Bing and, all the traditional search engines. And we're looking at spaces like TikTok, which is really a fantastic search engine. And a lot of people are finding, looking up questions and finding great content that way. And so I think making sure that your content on every channel is really well optimized for search. And that kind of boils back to, regardless of how rapidly the landscape changes or what the channels that we need to be on are, really getting specific about where your audience is, where are you going to meet them, what's their behavior like at every step of the funnel. I think that's really key. And I think that a great content team needs to be in deep partnership with an insights or a data team to kind of understand what that looks like. But yeah, I think to get a little bit more granular about like kind of just what things look like right now, I'm seeing a huge trend in episodic content. I think like I think podcasts are still really key, but I think, as TikTok positions itself as kind of a competitor, more to, Netflix and HBO Max, if you can believe it, rather than, other social media channels, I think we're going to kind of see this rise of episodic content. And I think there's a really cool opportunity for brands to kind of create, their own shows or series that kind of, further illustrate what they're all about. But I think, beyond that, it's just thinking outside the box, which is really kind of, blasé to say, but it's true. I think part of being a good content leader is always trying to think, one step ahead. And, I've been in really cool positions where, we've created zines for our customers just as a free add-on, or, creating really beautiful app experiences or personalized account experiences. I think it's really thinking about how your audience is really interacting with your product and, what would you want in their position and how are you customizing and tailoring to them. I think we're going to see kind of this rise of personalized content as well. So that's my very summarized version of that, but there's so much I think we could get into just in that question alone, as you said.
The way you ended, like, personalized content, I want to talk specifically about that because I feel like that's huge and that's massive. But I love what you're saying. I think the main theme is the encouraging trend we're seeing is the additional investment. And I think it's as individuals are getting more into leadership positions, they're valuing it more, they're getting it more invested in things, which comes with not only goals but headcount and visibility of strategic decisions. So I think like that trend, I hope continues, and I think you'll just see more and more. There's more voices, there's more brands, there's more stories out there. So it just means that organizations have to tell the right ones to the right audience. I think that's kind of the trend to do it. much from you when we get one of the calls. And like, I think I want to do another one, so I'm going to hold you to that. That we can do. But before I kind of let you go, where can you find how to interact with you and what's next for you?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram at Victoria Dawson Hoff. Same on TikTok. My TikTok presence is pretty low key these days, but I'm sure that'll change. But yeah, those are kind of like the 3 places where people can find me. Yeah. This was great. I love talking about this, and I really appreciate being here. I just breezed by.
It did, and like I have an agenda that I want to share with you for people that are watching. Like I think we got some content. I got so excited when you were coming on that I just like wanted to condense it all as just as possible, which is such a cool topic, and your insights and your knowledge, and so. I really appreciate you coming on, and I want you to stick around. So in seconds, you stick around for a chat before as I wrap things up here. So thank you, Victoria, for coming, and back to you. So I appreciate everybody for tuning into this episode. I'm obviously very passionate about it. I think that it is the future, and organizations are still figuring out how to do that. Victoria has a lot of great insights in terms of how to do effectively. That build great content teams in the future of content. So I'm sure there'll be more to come with her, but I want to thank everybody for tuning in this week. And I look forward to speaking with you again